So, I've just watched an interview on YouTube with Michael Shrimpton talking about the Epstein case. So, I've contacted Michael right away. Michael has experiences from both of the sides. He has trained people in the intelligence community, and he has also been a prisoner in a cell in which his cellmate attempted to hang himself. So, from both of those sides, Michael, what do you think happened that day in the cell with Epstein?
Well, yes. Having myself had the experience of a cellmate trying to hang himself, I speak, I suppose, with some authority. I don't think any other commentator on the Epstein case has actually gone to the aid of a cellmate trying to kill himself. Of course, Wandsworth covered it up because they were understaffed and they were so slow responding to the emergency call. I'd cut him down by the time the first responder attended. It felt like about 10 minutes. It might have been slightly shorter, but it felt like about a 10-minute delay before the cell alarm. You have an alarm in each cell in British prisons. The closed prisons like Wandsworth have an alarm in each cell, but of course, if there's not enough staff on duty, the alarm isn't much good. Now, I think it's quite clear that Jeffrey Epstein was murdered. I think it's quite clear that his cellmate was moved in order to create a killing zone, and the same applies to the suicide watch, which should be every 30 minutes.
Sorry, Michael, are you okay to swing your chair around a little bit just so you're back in the middle of the screen?
Yes. Sorry.
There you go. There you go. You're fine. You're fine. You swung away a little bit there.
Right. It's a habit of mine. I'm afraid I have a lovely captain's chair, and it's very comfortable. There's a tendency to swing around a bit. Yeah.
So on the night of the murder, then we found that the guards fell asleep. He was supposed.
Yeah, you have to be careful. The guards are federal employees. They're worried about their pension. The guards may be saying what they've been told to say. I never saw a prison guard asleep in a British prison. I don't think the guards regularly sleep at the Metropolitan Correctional Centre. I'm not buying that.
What about the cameras malfunctioning conveniently?
Oh, very convenient. Yeah. Well, this comes back to my killing zone point. So we have guards allegedly falling asleep. We have guards not where they're supposed to be. We have a cellmate moved out. We have cameras malfunctioning. This all points strongly towards the creation of a killing zone. Indeed, my assessment of the Epstein death hasn't been challenged in detail. Nobody's had a go at me, and I suspect, normally if I get things wrong, people are only too happy to jump over me. Fortunately, I don't get things wrong very often, says he immodestly. Modesty is one of my nicer qualities, but occasionally I permit myself the odd.
So I was in prison in Arizona, and the convict code is if there is a sex offender, someone who is a child sex trafficker, such as Epstein, KOS, kill on sight. Now, they put this huge guy in with him as his cellmate, Nicholas Tartaglione, who was an ex-cop turned gangster who had enticed 4 guys to his brother's bar and murdered them in a drug deal gone bad.
Yes.
This guy's facing the death penalty. He's got nothing to lose. He maybe be looking for a quid pro quo. They put this guy in with Epstein. You've got this natural law in prison of the convict code taking effect. Do you believe there was an initial botched attempt on Epstein that Nicholas Tartaglione attempted to carry out, but perhaps it was interrupted by some honest guards?
It certainly looks that way. I haven't looked in detail at the earlier assault, but you're referring back to the assault, which I think was the previous week from memory. Bear in mind, I've been dealing with a great many other things since the Epstein assassination, including.
I think it was 3 weeks before.
About 3 weeks before, yeah. Okay, it's possible that that Epstein was moved in with Taglioni in the hope that Taglioni would kill him. But Jeffrey Epstein was quite personable, and killing people at close quarters is not as easy as people make out, even with someone who's alleged to have killed people in a drug bust, which was probably a killing, if it was a killing by him, in hot blood. Cold-blooded killing isn't as simple as people make out. And I think we have to be slightly careful with the prisoners' code. Yes, there's certainly in American prisons, there is a very strong feeling against sex offenders. But prisoners take people as they find them, in my experience is. They don't. The KOS. I doubt that there was ever any real prospect of Taglioni or another cellmate killing Epstein. Prisoners tend to look out for each other, as I look out for my South Korean cellmate. Now, my cellmate was South Korean. He was a Roman Catholic. I took the view that he was probably innocent. He was suffering from serious depression. I was probably moved into his cell so that I could keep an eye on him, because they were very short-staffed. The wing knew that when they moved me in there. But I didn't have to think twice about he was a fellow human being, he was a fellow prisoner, he was my cellmate. And you look out for your cellmate. And I didn't hesitate. I didn't initiate. I was slow to pick up what was going on because I was watching TV. All the British prisons all have ancient valve TVs. They bought them a job lot from South Korea or somewhere years ago. Alba, I think they were called. They were pretty crappy TVs, I have to tell you. And they didn't get Sky Sports, so I couldn't watch the Test match. If you ever lock up members of MCC, you really ought to make sure that they've got Sky Sports in prison. And so I was watching a program on TV. There was a limited range of TV programs, but I think one was ITV4. And it so happens I quite like The Professionals, and I think it's probably The Professionals. Minder, The Professional. I love these old shows, so I'm quite happily having a cup of tea and watching a show and reading a book. And then behind me, he had strung himself up quietly and then attached him to the end of the bed. And then he was pulling back and he was starting to turn blue. So I heard a gurgle or a gargle. I heard a noise, turned around, and there he was. So I went straight to his aid, cut him down. I had to fight him. He was serious. He didn't want to be cut down. That's why he kept quiet. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a serious suicide attempt, in my judgment. I certainly had to prise his fingers away, and I was very determined to untie him. I read lots of mental health reports as a judge. As a barrister, I dealt with lots of cases involving mental health issues. I knew the man was severely depressed, that even though he might be wanting to kill himself that day, if I saved him, he'd probably change his mind in about 2 weeks, which he did. When he came back onto the wing, onto C Wing at Wano, he was very kind and gave me all his biscuits, which was, it doesn't sound very much to, you've been inside, I've been inside. To people watching this, may say, well, these biscuits, well, what's a biscuit? Packet of biscuits. In fact, in prison, biscuits are hoarded. The food at Wandsworth is pretty awful. So a bag gave me all his biscuits. It was more. He didn't have very much to give me. He couldn't give me cash, and I wouldn't have taken cash anyway. He didn't have much to give me. He had his biscuits, and he gave me all.
Small things go a long way in prison.
Small things go a long way in prison, and he was very relieved, and he was genuinely grateful to me. And so with the Catholic chaplaincy, who was Catholic, and they were away, tried to kill himself, and they came into the cell to see him on a regular basis. So I got to know them. They were very nice people, in fact. And all this will be recorded on the Catholic chaplaincy file, no doubt, even if it's been dropped off my prison file, because the prison were worried about liability because they were short-staffed and slow to respond to the emergency bell.
All right, well, going back to Epstein then.
Yeah.
So he gets taken off suicide watch. He's on suicide watch after this first incident, this mysterious incident where he's found unconscious on the floor and he's got injuries to his neck. He's put on suicide watch. Then he's moved to a special housing unit where he has a cellmate, and he's supposed to get checked every 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So we already mentioned that he wasn't getting checked every 30 minutes. They moved the cellmate, the potential witness. And then the autopsy says that he's got this fracture to his hyoid, in his neck.
Yes, the hyoid fractures trouble me. I'll emphasize I'm not a conspiracy theorist or a conspiracy analyst, to misquote Gore Vidal. I approach matters objectively, despite what my enemies say, the lies and rumors spread by my competitors that I do conspiracy theory. I don't. I approach each suspected murder with an open mind. I look at all the evidence, and I'm always willing to change my mind as fresh evidence becomes available. At the same time, if I call what the authorities are calling a suicide, if I call it homicide, I will do so without fear or favour. I had a lot of flack over calling the Kelly assassination what it was, but I was right to do so. I stand by every word that I published on the assassination of Dr. Kelly, as a friend of a friend. The fractures of the hyoid bone, there are multiple fractures and they trouble me. We wouldn't ordinarily see fractures of the hyoid bone, which sits up here. We wouldn't ordinarily see fractures of the hyoid in a suicide case. Now, I don't think I've got the IT skills. I'm afraid IT is not my area of expertise. I don't think I've got the IT expertise to bring you a picture of a hyoid bone, although I've got it on file. But the hyoid bone sits just below the mandible. It's just up here. It's essential to breathing. It's very strong, and it doesn't normally fracture in the cases of mature, healthy adults. And Jeffrey Epstein was healthy. He wasn't suffering from vitamin deficiency. I'm sure he was taking his vitamins and getting plenty of sunshine. There was no vitamin D deficiency. In the case of a normal, healthy adult, we would not expect the hyoid bone to fracture in a suicide by hanging. It's classically a sign of strangulation. It's consistent with strangulation. It's inconsistent with suicide. Now, I'm not saying that you cannot get a hyoid fracture with a hanging. You can. What I'm saying is that it's rare, and the multiple fractures are more consistent with homicide than they are with suicide. When I call this death homicide, i.e. murder, I am looking at the picture, at the evidence in the round. I'm looking at the medical evidence, particularly the hyoid fractures. I'm looking at the withdrawal of the cellmate, which was a very strong red light for me. I'm looking at the withdrawal of the suicide watch, interference with CCTV, guards going missing. All these suggest the creation of a killing zone. And I'm also looking at motive. The career group, which controls the CIA, FBI, and probably controls federal prisons, certainly in a position to get one of their death squads into a federal prison. The career group based in Frankfurt certainly would have not only the means, but also the opportunity and the motive, because Jeffrey Epstein was a career group asset.
Okay, so I've looked at the court documents, the victim statements. Multiple victims have expressed that they were in orgies with Prince Andrew, or that Prince Andrew, he had a puppet on his hand and he grabbed one's breast. So you've got all of this information that's supporting each other, the victim's statements, yet the palace is categorically and emphatically denying that Andrew has done anything of this nature. Now we've got the FBI has recently, there's been an announcement in the Daily Mail that the FBI is probing Prince Andrew, like a criminal investigation. Is Andrew completely untouchable, or is he compromised and at risk right now?
I think he's innocent. I've never met His Royal Highness. He's reviewed me when I used to march past the cenotaph on Remembrance Sunday. He's certainly taken the salute, so I've saluted him. That's, I think, as close as I've ever got to Prince Andrew. I think it's quite clear that Jeffrey Epstein was targeting Prince Andrew at German request. So one of the things that Epstein was doing was compromising assets at German request, because he was a German operative. So it's quite clear he got close to Prince Andrew in the way that not as close as Wallace Simpson got to Edward VIII. She was a German asset as well. But he's a German operative. He's got instructions to compromise Prince Andrew. He's tried to do so, but failed. I don't believe those women who are saying they had sex with His Royal Highness Prince Andrew, particularly when they were underage. I'm not buying that for one moment. And you must bear in mind that there is a powerful motive, because you've got a large estate worth possibly 600 million US dollars or thereabouts. That's the onshore estate. And they and their lawyers are looking for a chunk of that. So when women are saying things, their statements have been drafted by their lawyers. Their lawyers have got a financial incentive under the American system of contingency fees. And I think I view with suspicion the statements that say that Prince Andrew had sex with girls under the age of 18. Bear in mind the statement of Run Roberts, isn't it? Her statement's already been dismissed by a judge. I mean, these are stale claims. They've been made before, and her affidavit was struck out as impertinent and immaterial in previous proceedings.
Okay, if the criminal case is closed with Epstein's death,
yes,
he had this sweetheart plea bargain deal whereby his co-conspirators had immunity.
Mm-hmm.
But now we've got Jean-Luc Brunel, who was running the modeling agency, who was procuring underage girls from Europe for Epstein. And we've got Ghislaine Maxwell, multiple statements saying Ghislaine Maxwell was a main procurer and a participator in the rapes of these underage girls. What do you think is in store for Ghislaine Maxwell and Jean-Luc Brunel?
Well, I think it's unlikely that either will be prosecuted. Certainly the American authorities, the FBI, are in a position to file a report with the Department of Justice. Theoretically, they could both be extradited to the United States to stand trial. I don't see it happening. I think there are all sorts of problems with witnesses, and I think one has to view the claims of rape with suspicion as well. The indications are that Epstein was prepared to pay large amounts of money. Rape has a different legal, well, there are 50 different jurisdictions in the United States, 51 if you count the District of Columbia, and 52 if you count the federal jurisdiction. Rape varies from state to state, but, and you can have statutory rape, whereby a girl is under the age of consent becomes irrelevant, so that consensual sex with a minor under the age of consent is what's called statutory rape. Even if it's not in fact rape, it's deemed to be rape because the girl is deemed to be too young to give consent, which is it's a perfectly reasonable provision to have in a criminal statute. In the case of Prince Andrew, I think the suggestion is that he had sex with a girl who was a minor but 17. Therefore, I don't think statutory rape kicks in. I'm not sure whether it's New York or Florida, but I don't think statutory rape would kick in. I think she was too old for that. And in most cases, I think the allegations really are of consensual sex for money. In other words, prostitution rather than rape.
Okay, so
I'd be very surprised if he had enough cash. He was generating huge amounts of cash offshore because he was given privileged access to the high yield offshore trading programs. So Jeffrey Epstein offshore was probably worth several billion. He could certainly turn $1 billion into several billion quite quickly with access to the programs. They run from Frankfurt. They are controlled by Germany, which is why we had the financial crash in 2008. Not that the Chancellor of the Exchequer knows. The Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time didn't know what was going on. It was Gordon Brown, and the current Chancellor of the Exchequer, frankly, is no wiser. They need to read my book, Spy Hunter, but which I'm hoping I can advertise through you.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll put a link to your book in the description box of this video. But before
I think Jeffrey Epstein had enough cash to be able to buy girls, and I'd be surprised if very much violence was used.
Okay, but the victims in the sweetheart deal were, Jeffrey was charged with prostitution with girls under 18.
Yeah.
The victims were incensed that they were then being labeled prostitutes, and they were kind of being criminalized themselves, and their testimonies wouldn't be taken seriously. Well, hence, they started to file these civil suits.
In most American states, prostitution is not a crime. It's not a crime in Britain. It's a crime to live off the earnings of prostitutes. They were, in practice, again, there are a number of women involved here. In practice, they were sex workers. Prostitution, I agree with the girls or the women. Prostitution is a loaded term with connotations of criminal activity. I prefer the term sex workers. These women, for the most part, on their own statements, seem to have been sex workers. They seem to have been paid. I rely particularly on the fact there were no or very few contemporaneous complaints. If violence is used, if there's what we in England would term rape, that's to say, sexual penetration with violence or threat of violence, one would expect a raped woman or young girl in those circumstances to go straight to the police, and then you'd have medical evidence. Well, I'm not aware of any medical evidence in any case of violence being used, and I'm not aware of any contemporaneous complaint. This is one of the reasons why I reject the complaint about Boris Johnson. If there's a sexual assault, you know you've been assaulted, you go to the police, and if you delay 20 years and time your allegation to just before the leader's speech at a party conference, one didn't take much notice of it.
Well, I just read this morning that one of the teenage girls, she had agreed to give Epstein a massage, but then he had her straddle him, and then he got on her, and he forced his penis inside her without her consent. So
What?
there are allegations that horrific things like that happened. And if a girl is underage, isn't she a victim anyway? She's not. You couldn't really say this is authentic sex work.
Yes, I'm not defending underage sex. What I'm trying to get at is the truth. That these women have motives for exaggerating what went on, and they certainly have motives for introducing violence. My concern is that these are very late complaints of violence, that had there genuinely been force used, I would have expected to see a prompt complaint to the police, which we didn't have. Absent prompt complaint to the police, I attach little weight to claims now of violence. I certainly agree. I'm not defending what Epstein did. He was a German operative, and what the Germans were getting him to do was disgusting, full stop. And of course, there were boys involved as well as girls. So I'm not defending for one moment what he did, but what I don't want to do, the man's dead and can't answer back, even though he's a German operative, even though I held no brief for him, I don't want to make a statement about him that is untrue. I think it is untrue to say that he used violence against the young women in question. He certainly paid them, it was immoral, and if they were under the age of consent, it was illegal. He was certainly engaging sex workers, and he was certainly doing so for a political purpose, either to entrap or compromise targets of German intelligence, or to reward mostly democratic politicians for political favours to Germany, the EU, and whoever. That's all completely wrong, wrong morally, it's wrong politically. Speaking as an intelligence analyst, it's wrong operationally, because it's the sort of operation that is bound to blow up in your face, as it has done in this case. But I don't think that the girls were coerced into having sex. I think they were sex workers and they were being paid. If they were under the consent, then that's a crime, and it's morally wrong, and certainly to that extent I have sympathy with the girls. I don't have sympathy with any exaggerated claims, particularly if they're made fraudulently with a view to extracting money from the Epstein estate.
Okay, I'd just like to say then that the statements that I read today were filed by the Florida Police Department with lead investigator Rick Curry during the original investigation. Yeah. Before all of this come in the headlines in recent years, the rape and the Prince Andrew stuff was filed back then.
Yeah, but what was the delay between the alleged incident and the reporting to the police?
Well, it was recorded in the courts, but then Epstein got the sweetheart deal, and it all got swept away. So it came back out in the civil suit.
I think the deal in Florida is described as a sweetheart deal. If I were a Florida prosecutor, I can see why the prosecution went with that deal, given the evidence that they had. I suspect the Florida district attorney, from memory, it was a state prosecution in Florida, was it not a federal one?
It was Alex Acosta, who became Labor Secretary for President Trump, and he said that he gave the sweetheart deal because he was told it was above his pay grade or below his pay grade. It was an intelligence matter, and he needed to let it go.
Well, yes, it was an intelligence matter. Of course, it was a German intelligence, not American intelligence. He probably wasn't aware of the career group. Most American politicians are intelligence illiterate. He may not have been aware of the career group. Yeah, that's entirely possible. But one has to, in defense of the Florida prosecutors, one also has to consider that they may not have regarded the women as credible witnesses. And if they were lying, if they were exaggerating their story, one of the problems when you're prosecuting, I've prosecuted, obviously the CPS don't send me work at the moment, I'm no longer embarrassed with it, I couldn't accept the work even if they sent it to me. But one of the problems you've got when you're prosecuting, particularly sexual offences, if the victim is exaggerating what happened to him or her, it can take down their whole story, and as a prosecutor you're left with nothing. With no corroborative evidence of violence, no DNA, no medical reports of bruising and so on. Without corroborative medical evidence, I can see why a prosecutor might think, I can't take these allegations to trial. I'm less critical than most of the Florida outcome. I can see why prosecutors acted as they did, and I don't particularly see a conspiracy. I'm not denying that I'm not denying there was political pressure brought to bear as well, but I don't think it's a straightforward case of, as it was in my case, of political pressure being brought to bear on prosecutors and prosecutors caving in. I think there were weaknesses in the evidence that would encourage a prosecutor to think in terms of a plea bargain, regardless of who the defendant was and regardless of the pressure that may have been coming from the capital of Florida.
How prolific are child...
I'm struggling to remember what the what's the capital of Florida? Tampa, isn't it?
The capital of Florida? I can't remember either.
I don't think I've never seen the Florida state capital. I think it's Tampa, isn't it? Perhaps it's
swing your chair back into the middle.
Oh, sorry. Yes,
there we go. There we go.
I'm relaxing comfortably. I should explain to your viewers. I'm relaxing comfortably in my study at home.
Can I ask that from your experience then, how prolific are elite child sex rings and child sex trafficking?
Oh, very, very. They're particularly prolific in the European Union. It's a German tactic. It's a German tactic that they've used for decades. Certainly, it goes back to the Gestapo and the Abwehr prior to World War II. And the Madeleine McCann case is one I was involved in operationally, and there we have a classic illustration of the way the Germans operate. A DVD paedophile ring in the Algarve has instructions to kidnap 5-year-old blonde girls, or at least scout 5-year-old blonde girls. They get photographs. One of them is of Madeleine McCann, who happened to be aged just 3 when the photograph was taken, turned 4 a few days later, and that is sent to the ring in Brussels, which is supplying children for abuse and eventual murder to senior officials of the European Commission in Brussels and NATO. The NSA, intercept the email with her photograph. Its significance is not appreciated until after a kidnap. But after a kidnap, there is a review, and her photograph is picked up going by email from Praia de Luz in Portugal to Brussels, and then from Brussels, the ring to the private email account of a very senior European Commission official. Obviously, I know who it was. That because of that official's involvement, MI6, who found all this out within about 24 hours and had access to the GCHQ traffic, who turned out access to NSA traffic, NSA saw the MI6 saw the NSA intercepts and had a meltdown. No way MI6 could pursue it, because were the British public to become aware in 2007 that Madeleine McCann was kidnapped to the order of a senior official of the European Commission in Brussels, Eurosceptic opinion, we might have had Brexit 10 years ago.
Wow.
2019. So that's a classic illustration. And in the course of that, we discovered I think we shut down a total of 3 rings. One operating in Paris, one operating in Madrid, and one operating in Sao Paulo. And we damaged the ring operating in Brussels. So we damaged one ring, pretty much got 3 shot down. And you can track this. If you look at the number of kidnapped kiddies, some of your viewers may remember that 10 years ago, before the Madeleine McCann kidnap, so going back 15 years, there were huge concerns about street kids going missing in Sao Paulo. We found out where they were going. They were being trafficked across the Atlantic, and they were being trafficked into Brussels. And they were then ended up being murdered in snuff movies, and we had satellite imagery of really pathetic little graves, absolutely tragic little graves, unmarked, surrounding a snuff movie facility in Toledo, Spain. I told the Spanish shut down. Absolutely awful. And I have to tell you, if the European Union not careful, all this is going to come out either in the general election. Well, we're going to have general election next month, I imagine. This is likely to come out that the EU are in the Madeleine McCann kidnap up to their necks. And the Chancellor of Germany, with every respect, the Chancellor of Germany knows a little bit more about the McCann case than she's let on so far. And she might want to be a little franker with the German public and the British public about the contents of a discussion between herself, Prime Minister Socrates of Portugal, and the President of the European Commission in a conference near Lisbon shortly after the news broke that Michael Shrimpton was on the job and had located Madeleine McCann and had found out what had gone on.
What's your take on Ted Heath and Jimmy Savile?
Oh, there's no doubt that Heath was a paedophile, and there's no doubt that Jimmy Savile was running a paedophile ring. But again, there's a connection to Germany. You see, Savile was a German operative. I think technically you would describe him as a sub-operative. Savile was run. The Savile ring was run out of the Cabinet Office. The then Cabinet Secretary, as you would expect for Cabinet Secretaries, because they mostly are scumbags, no offence intended, but your average Cabinet Secretary is a complete amoral scumbag. Hunt, the Cabinet Secretary at the time, John Hunt, was a paedophile, and he was being supplied with boys by Savile. His interest was boys, not girls. And Heath was also being supplied with boys by Savile, and Savile and a friend were taking them, or an operative, were taking boys down to Heath's yacht. And the number of boys that went onto the yacht was not the same as the number of boys who came off the yacht. Jersey police eventually, this is all happening in the Channel Islands, Jersey police eventually found out and launched a criminal inquiry, but they concentrated on the old Abwehr headquarters. No surprises there. That was not a coincidence. The Hope de Guerin Children's Home was in the old Abwehr headquarters in Jersey. They thought the boys had been buried in the ground, so they were running around with spades, digging up the grounds. Sorry, my chair is far too comfortable. I'm swinging. I'm swinging to the left, but most people say that Michael swings to the right. They were digging up the nursing home grounds, but of course what was happening was the boys were being weighted with strips of anchor chain, and were being tossed overboard, having been murdered after having been raped by Ted Heath. Now, I briefed in the Wiltshire police inquiry. I warned them that Nick, the Carl Beach, had been put up as a patsy, that he'd been put up to damage the good intelligence by saying the same thing, only for him to be revealed as a fraud. I warned them that Beach was, I didn't know his name then, but I warned him that the source code name Nick was not genuine. It was working for GO2, and the whole Nick thing was a put-up job. And they should pay no attention whatsoever to what he said. I also warned them against satanistic, there was a lot of nonsense about satanistic cults and so on, satanic cults, all absolute nonsense. I warned them off that. And I advised them that the then Director General of Intelligence, a friend of mine, sadly no longer with us, Admiral Sir Louis Le Bailey, Vice Admiral Sir Louis Le Bailey, had a source on Morning Cloud 4, the yacht. I've got his book here somewhere. Yes, that is a book written by Vice Admiral Sir Louis Le Bailey, the man around the engine, Vice Admiral Sir Louis Le Bailey, KBE, and it's yes, Michael, best wishes. Yes, it's got. You probably can't see that, but that's well, perhaps you can. That was signed by Louis, who made a present of the book for me, which is very kind of him. So Sir Louis, who was Director General of Intelligence, had an asset on the yacht. One of the crew was ex-Royal Navy, or several of the crew were ex-Royal Navy, and they reported to Naval Intelligence. Obviously, you've got the leader of the opposition being involved in the murder of children. Birmingham City Council were heavily involved because these were boys that were going missing from care homes. Nobody was keeping a record. Insofar as records were kept, they were being disposed of. And Birmingham City Council and another number of councils in England were in on the ring. And of course, local government in Britain largely reports to the Cabinet Office anyway. So local authorities run children's homes. They are seen by the Cabinet Office as valuable resources for children to abuse who don't have loving parents like Madeleine McCann did to look after them. And it was convenient for the Cabinet Office to have local authorities supply kids to the paedophile, the Savile ring. All deeply disgusting, and it implicates our former Prime Minister in multiple crimes of rape and murder. But those are the facts, and I don't shrink from saying that. Ted and I never got on. He didn't like me. He was very nervous of me.
So I interviewed an ex-cop recently, John Wedger, and he was assigned to Vice. And every time that he found out that the clients for these underage girls that had been taken from the foster homes and prostituted, every time he found out that the clients were politicians or TV celebrities, the investigations were shut down by orders from above. So is that still the situation today?
The Cabinet Office took over the police in 1964. Some authorities, like Wiltshire, held out for decades. Wiltshire's only recently succumbed to Cabinet Office control. They had a very good Chief Constable, McVeil, until recently. But the Cabinet Office started to assert serious control over police from 1964 with the disastrous Police Act 64, which had never been enacted. And yes, the Cabinet Office in a position to shut down police inquiries. Savile knew that he had, with the backing of the Cabinet Office, he had complete immunity. And that implicates senior Cabinet Office officials, not just John Hunt, in crimes of murder. And these bastards, no offence intended, need to be held to account. Some of the people who were supporting the Savile ring in the 70s will still be alive. And in my view, they should be brought to trial. There's no statute of limitations, certainly not on murder or rape.
How did Savile, just a disc jockey, end up in the highest levels of the royal circles to the point whereby when Di and Charles were having problems, he was brought in as a marriage guidance counsellor?
Yeah, the Cabinet Office. You see, the Cabinet Office also dictate to Her Majesty, quite improperly, but they effectively dictate to Her Majesty whom Her Majesty should appoint to the royal household. So this is a tactic that goes back to Stamfordham. There was a scumbag called Lord Stamfordham who compromised George V and was instrumental in arranging for Britain to allow the murders of the Romanovs in Russia. Stamfordham, who held back from critical intelligence of George V on numerous occasions, reported to the Cabinet Secretary Maurice Hankey. And Cabinet Office penetration of the palace, the royal household, is a phenomenon that goes down to the present day. For example, when my royal petition application, which was held back from two Home Secretaries, and I think has only just been delivered to Priti Patel in Manchester, I arranged for someone to take a hard copy to Manchester, hoping it was delivered on Sunday afternoon, waiting just to hear back. But the Cabinet Office intercepted a royal petition, a copy of an application for a royal petition, which went to Buckingham Palace. So they had somebody in the post room. And again, it took some time before we were able to get round the Cabinet Office asset in the palace. It eventually had to get up to Balmoral Castle, so I am told. I didn't personally deliver it, obviously, but I've never been to Balmoral, but I'm told somebody did on my behalf, which was very kind of them. So that shows you the extent of Cabinet Office influence over the palace. So Savile would have been given instructions, very like Epstein. Savile, like Epstein, would have been given instructions to target specific members of the royal family. So Savile was all out to compromise them.
Well, look, Michael, you've been really generous with your time. If people watching this want to buy your book, what's it called and where is it available?
Well, it's called Spy Hunter. I've got a copy here. I've got several working copies at home. There we are. I think that's my working copy of the first edition, which is now in the second edition. Oh yes, no, that's my galley proofs. Like any author, I get sent the galleys, so I've got that. That's the galley edition, but the published edition is very similar, and it's available from June Press. So there we are, Spy Hunter.
And what is the gist of the book? Just briefly.
June Press. June Press are in Totnes in Devon. So they will sell you a copy. I'm hopeful that we can get an American publisher. I'm in negotiations or in discussions with somebody who wants to publish the book in the States, but as is so often the case, those discussions are proceeding slowly. I'm never sure whether I'm being spun out and hung out to dry by someone who's dangling the prospect of publication in front of me in order to stop me opening up discussions with other publishers or not. I don't know how I don't know how genuine the approach was. I'm waiting to hear back. But,
is it your story or is it a work of fiction?
An American edition, yeah.
Is it your story or a work of fiction?
Oh no, it's certainly not a work of fiction. It's an intelligence history. The first third of the book is my history, so people know how I came to know what I do, and then the rest of the book sets out what I know. It's an intelligence history of the DVD, but it covers the German Empire. It covers German intelligence prior to 1945. That's part 2. And then part 3 is the DVD. So part 2 takes the story from the 19th century to the end of World War II. The DVD is set up towards the end of World War II. And part 3 covers the DVD itself, which is the new agency that takes over from the Abwehr, the Gestapo, the BDI intelligence, signals intelligence service, the Luftwaffe, Kriegsmarine and Wehrmacht, or here intelligence departments, and also includes elements of the SS intelligence.
And if people want to find you online, are you on all of the different socials?
Sorry?
Are you on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, any of those?
My Twitter is @RealMichaelShrimpton. I only have a very tiny handful of loyal Twitter followers, but the small but happy band of Shrimpton followers on Twitter is growing, sort of at the rate of about 2 or 3 a week.
All right, I'll put a link in.
I'm real Michael Shrimpton on Twitter, yes.
I'll put a link into your Twitter as well. All right, Michael, thank you very much for your time. You take care.
My pleasure, you too. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.